Welcome to the Fall Conference of the Utah Land Use Institute. Thank you for joining us. My name is David Hershey. I'm a partner with the law firm of Nelson Christensen, Hollingworth, and Williams here in Salt Lake, and currently serve as chair of the Utah Land Use Institute. This conference has been planned and organized by the board of the Land Use Institute. Jody Hoffman and Mike Ostermiller are vice chairs of that organization, and our members include Brent Bateman, Wayne Budge, Nicole Cottle, Gary Crane, Professor Chris Nelson, and Professor David Thomas. And of course, the real power behind the Institute is our executive director, Craig Call, and our deputy executive director, Wilf Summercorn, and our program director, Jonathan Call. We also acknowledge and thank our staff, Janine Call and Karina Brown, for their untiring service to the Institute and to this conference. Please join me in a round of appreciation for those folks. This year's Fall Conference sponsors are the S.J. and Jesse E. Quinney Foundation, the Utah Division of Housing and Community Development, the Utah Department of Workforce Services, the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman, the Utah Department of Commerce, and Salt Lake County. Our Institute partners are the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the Utah Association of Realtors, the Salt Lake Association of Realtors, the Home Builders of Utah, the Real Property section of the Utah State Bar, and the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association. We appreciate our sponsors, and we would not be able to put on this conference without their financial assistance, and so please join me in thanking them as well. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. In case of emergency, exits are to the rear and to the front of this hall. Restrooms are located in the lobby of the building area. In the foyer, just as you entered this room, there are tables set up where we have sign-up sheets for continuing education. So any of you who are seeking continuing education, please be sure to sign those sheets today and during the break. Finally, we are grateful for all of our speakers and moderators for their willingness to share their expertise with us. Please note that bios for all of our speakers and moderators are found in your materials. I'll now turn the time over to Brent Bateman, who will introduce today's program, aptly called by some, How Firm a Foundation or Not. Brent.
Thank you, my friend, and thank you all for being here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this today. Like I said, my name is Brent Bateman. I'm with the law firm of Denton, Durham, Jones, and Pinniger, and it's so wonderful to be here and to see so many of my friends, both past and future friends, even those of you who I've disagreed with and fought with and think I'm some kind of nut job. It's still good to see you. Talking to you, Don Sargent. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to spend the day taking paper cuts and pouring lemon juice in them. We are going to talk about difficult things that have happened to us in the past. We are going to talk about disasters. We are going to talk about how we respond to them and what we can do about them, because although for most of us, they've never happened to us. To those of us who they have happened to, we'll tell you that you never know. You never know, and it's good to be prepared, and it's good to know what to do. And so we're hopeful that we'll make this afternoon interesting and exciting for everyone, and it'll be something that you'll walk away with something. I'd like to invite the other members of my panel to come up here, Paxton, Steve. If you don't mind coming up here, because I'd like to go ahead and introduce the panel. Very grateful to the panelists for this morning session. For this early session, coming to join us and sharing with us their experiences and expertise. First of all, I'd like to introduce my good friend Paxton Guyman. Paxton he's a longtime attorney that I'm sure all of you know. He is general counsel for Edge Homes and he is the main paper cut sufferer for today. He is going to be sharing with us information. The only way I got him to agree to do this is I told him if he came here, he would only have to do this once instead of to each one of us one at a time. And he does not want to have to do that. So he's going to be sharing information with us primarily about what happened in Draper. Also, we have on the panel my good friend Gary Crane. Gary is a Layton City attorney. Gary, I don't know that I need to say anything to introduce him. I think everyone knows Gary. If you do not know Gary, please get to know him, and get to know him as soon as you can, because pretty soon Gary he's gonna be dead to us. And we're especially lucky today to have Steve Bowman with us. Steve is a geologist. He's a PhD. He works for the Utah Geological Survey, and he's the manager of the Geologic Hazards program. When I was calling around talking to people about this and about this presentation, everyone did the same thing, and they pointed me to Steve Bowman as the man who knows his stuff and who knows the science of all of this, and that's what he's here to share with us today. I'd also like to doubly thank him because he agreed to do this yesterday. Because we did have someone else lined up who, for various reasons, wasn't able to be here. And so Steve has stepped in, and he is ready and prepared to go. As a matter of fact, I just want to make a pitch for some of the materials that he's provided. They're available just for you to pick up about landslides and earthquake resilience and stuff like that are out on the table. These are materials from the Utah Geological Survey, and they can just grab those, yeah?
If you run out, let me know, we'll get some more.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So, I want to show this. Paxton, you might want to close your eyes during this. This is we've all seen this. This is the video from the AP feed. It's very dramatic, and it was on the news all over the country. Doing an internet search, I saw it on the news in Chicago, in Tampa, in Pittsburgh, and it's dramatic. So, if I can get this to come up on the right screen. And why isn't this coming up all of a sudden? Probably because I need to do that. There it is.
Look at the top, look at the top. Holy. Oh my. Wow. There it goes.
Now, you'd be interested, I think.
Holy.
Stop. Once was enough.
Oh my. Wow.
Just here to give you nightmares, Paxton. You'd be interested probably to see some of the comments from some of those videos off of some of those news stations. And first of all, I advise never to read the comments, but I had to. And the amount of finger pointing that was done, and the comments range from somebody saying, you know, the wise man built his house upon the rock, to I can't believe how flimsy the buildings are nowadays. They're built with matchsticks, to the city. This is all on the city for approving this. All sorts of, everyone on the internet, right, is an expert. And everyone on the internet knows who is the problem here. Well, we are not here today to point fingers. Those of you who have been part of the Utah Land Use Institute in the past know that this is a safe space. We have people from all parts of the land use and development community here, right? And we don't point fingers here, especially when it's not obvious and clear who the finger should be pointed at. But we're definitely here to learn, and we're definitely here to support each other because we need each other. And without one another, we're not going to get anywhere, right? The cities and local governments, they need developers for growth. We've decided in this country to privatize growth, right? It's a government function, but we've decided to privatize it. And we've turned it over to developers, and that brings a whole new set of problems that we all experience, right? On the other hand, those who are in that business need the city in order to make that business work, right? And so here today is the time that we take to get together and to talk and to learn. Now, so the question of finger pointing is off the table today. And again, I'm not sure who the fingers can be pointed at. I am pretty confident that in Draper, but in all of these kinds of situations, which happen again and again, I'm pretty confident that the entire situation was engineered on multiple times, multiple levels. I'm pretty sure that the engineers who did that did their absolute best. I'm pretty sure that the city did everything they could to do their due diligence. I am pretty sure that the developer had no intention or desire to build any kind of inferior or failing product. But we see something like that and we think, what do we do? Well, that's why I thought that today's session would be interesting to kind of examine and to look into this. So what I want to do to start with is to start by turning the time over to Paxton. He's counsel for Edge Homes. They built those homes. And we want to hear his story, kind of what's going on. After that, we're going to turn it over to Gary, because Gary, although he wasn't involved with anything that happened in Draper, this really isn't about Draper. This is about things that happen everywhere. And Gary has seen things like that over the course of his career in Layton multiple times, including this year. And then we're going to spend some time talking to Steve and finding out from Steve what the science of this is. And then we're going to have a conversation. So, Paxton.
Great.
Take it away.
Thank you. I've given Brent, let's see, I don't want that sound to happen. I've given Brent a few more videos. Should I turn that off? There we go. You can still hear me okay? Okay. Happy to be here with you today. I want this to be helpful and informative to all of you who are present. And with that in mind, I had Brent download some additional videos and photos. But I want to say a few things first. First of all, these homes were built by Edge Homes. What that photograph or that video you just saw doesn't really depict, but you will see in a few of these pictures, is that those two homes were built on what was formerly a ravine. A natural ravine that had 40 feet of fill material filled up to build those two homes. Now, this would be a good time for all of you to get rid of the jokes and the play on words about edge homes, building homes on an edge that fell off the edge. I've heard them all many times. But what's interesting is, so I started with Edge in April of 2022. This happened in April of 2023. The homes were built and closed in the fall of 21. And I want to walk you through just a little bit of a time frame so you can see what happened. First, as general counsel for Edge Homes, one of my assignments that I've worked diligently on for the last 9 months has been to figure out what was happening, what was going wrong, and why did this disaster happen. And I can tell you that having gone back through and conducted full-blown analysis and investigation on everything that was happened, I don't think we did anything wrong or anything different from what any other developer or builder would have done. But I have learned a few things that I want to share with you at the end of this presentation that I strongly recommend to any home builder or developer who's going to try to develop on a hillside, and especially if you're going to try to build homes on fill material. Because there are some big protections that in hindsight I wish would have been done, but they are not required by code. They're not part of industry standards to my knowledge, and these are lessons that we should all try to learn from. So, first of all, the timeline. Those two homes were closed in September of 21. That's when the home buyers closed on their purchase and moved in. Within a couple of months, the homeowners started contacting us and saying, hey, we're seeing some strange cracking in some foundation, we're seeing some cracks in our basement, come inspect them. Well, those of you who are home builders know that that is not uncommon. The one guaranteed rule about concrete is it will crack. You'll see some settlement. And there are industry norms. Differential from one lateral point to another, you don't want to see more than about 1.5 inches, maybe a maximum of a 2-inch settlement differential in a home. These were well within that range. Nevertheless, we started doing periodic checks to make sure nothing significant was happening. Fast forward to October of 2022, so a year ago, literally a year ago today, we had a meeting with Draper City, and the measurements of these homes started to show not just vertical settlement, but lateral movement. And if those of you who are familiar with home building and development know, that is a very, very significant problem. Vertical settlement can be resolved with helical piers. You install piers, you shore it up, all sorts of very widely recognized and successful techniques to stop vertical settlement. But when you start seeing lateral movement, I should say, and shifting, that's when you know you've got a problem. So a year ago today, Draper City revoked the certificates of occupancy for those two homes, forcing the owners to move out of their own homes. Now, we were sympathetic at Edge. We said, look, we will pay for your alternative housing expenses, your relocation expenses, your renting, all of that. We do not want you, our homeowners, to suffer from this financially. But that's what started the serious concerns, is when we started seeing movements indicating lateral shifting, not just vertical. Then, within a few months, this happened. April 22nd, 2023, 4 a.m. in the morning, every home builder's worst nightmare, to see homes that you built fall off the mountain. Now, I can tell you, if those homes were built with steel beams and the strongest of industry materials, they still would have fallen. There was nothing wrong with the construction of the homes. It was the earth on which they were sitting. The whole hillside gave way and slid 1,000 feet down the hill. There is no residential structure that can sit in the air. When the underground falls away and slides off the mountain, the homes will go with them. So, as part of the original development for this subdivision, we went through every single requirement for compliance with the Draper City hillside ordinances for development on slopes, multiple geological studies and hazard studies, 3 or 4 pages of requirements to be met to make sure this hillside was built correctly, and this still happened. Now, would you pull up a couple more of those videos?
So I got them right there. You can tell me which one you want.
Let's start with,
I don't know if you can see that, but this one is conveyor belt system, hillside excavation, hillside repair.
okay, let's just start with the one on the left and just kind of click through. I want you to see what the aftermath really is from something like this. Because although 2 of the homes fell, so I took this video last week. What you see is that we are in the process of physically removing all of the soil that was used to build up that hillside. We do not want to reuse any of it as we rebuild the hillside. And we've come up with a conveyor belt system. This is a steep hillside where the dirt is being placed onto these conveyor belts, and then it is transported from one conveyor belt to another as it works its way up to the street, and then is put in dump trucks to be hauled away. Let's go to the next one. This one shows this conveyor belt system. People think, oh, a landslide, you clean it up, you move on. It is not that simple. We only had a couple different choices. One was to cut a new access road all the way through the county's property, cutting off all the mountain bike trails. Maybe turn the volume down just a little bit. There we go. And we decided this was the least intrusive system when functionally equivalent cost. But where those two homes fell, there are literally 100,000 cubic yards of dirt that we are removing and then bringing in new engineered fill from outside to rebuild the hillside. What you're seeing here is what we call a soil nail wall. That's a public street on the top right-hand side. We're no more than 5 feet from the sidewalk where everything fell and slid away. And you can see how far down the hillside that slide went. That's the path of the slide all the way to the bottom. So to safeguard the hillside and shore it up to make sure we have no further damage to the homes, we've had to remove all of the soil that was originally brought in to build up that hillside. We've installed soil nails. Every one of those things sticking out of the shotcrete is a soil nail that goes into the soil laterally at an angle, anywhere from 30 to 75 feet, to make sure we're drilling into solid bedrock and there will be no further movement of any kind. We've had to extend that 4 houses to the west to make sure that those homes don't have any further settlement. Let's go to the next one.
Is there any concern about those homes up till now?
There has been some concerns, and we're conducting testing and surveying weekly, and to our shock, candidly, those homes aren't moving on either side of that slide area. The homes are fine. The one home you see there, we thought we were going to lose it initially. If you'll go to the next picture, you'll see why. Yeah, one more over, I'm sorry. So you can see how close that slide area is to the home that's there we're looking west with the white side. One more photo over, and you're going to see that there are fissures in the yard. That's the yard of that home. What's that? No, they do not live in that home, and in fact, we bought that home back from them so that they didn't have any concerns. But we have been able to save that home. The foundation, the footings of that home have not moved one bit. Everything around it has been moving, and that's why that soil nail wall with the shotcrete is going all the way up to the side.
So are these fissures pre-landslide? Is this a pre-landslide picture?
No, that's after the landslide. And then that shows how extensive the work is when these walls were originally built. So this is pre-landslide, before the homes were built. We installed multiple layers of retaining walls, and then one more over. And you can see this is our effort originally back in the fall of 2020 as we are building up this entire ravine so that we could have homes along the north side of that road, 2 of which are now gone.
So where were the homes? Were they in this area right here?
Yep, that's where they were. Couple lessons to learn.
This one.
And there's this one. This one I think is the most impactful aerial photo taken by a drone that shows where the homes were and how the whole hillside just fell out beneath them and slid down the hill. You look at all those retaining walls on the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's another one. There are 5 layers of retaining walls. And as part of our hillside shoring and remediation plan, we are removing all those retaining walls, taking out all that fill material, reconstructing the entire hillside, not just with those soil nail and the shotcrete walls, but with engineered fill, new drainage system, whole new levels of compaction. That's how devastating. Now, if you don't even include the costs that we've paid to buy back the homes from those homeowners, if you're looking at just the costs of stabilizing the hillside and remediating it, it's almost $10 million. $10 million. It's a huge cost. that's our worst nightmare, right? As home builders and developers, that is our worst nightmare. Now, I have a few practice pointers and ideas on what can be done. I don't want to take up all the time though, so maybe I'll save that for the end, however you want.
Yeah, let's move on and then we'll come back because we do want to hear everyone's practice pointers and discuss them.
Okay.
So, but we'll turn it to Gary.
Paxton and I are often in competition with each other, but he wins this year. Absolutely, hands down. The city of Layton has experienced over the years a number of different slides. Over my career with Layton, I can remember 12 that are at least as devastating as this one has been, where we've had to move people out of their homes and then try and figure out how to deal with the aftermath of that. This year particularly was an incredibly bad year when it came to slides in Layton City. As some of you realize, we're built on a lake bed, and Layton has a ton of hollows in places that you wouldn't even suspect hollows. And individuals want to build on the sides of those hollows. And if you think that 2 hands are going to be enough fingers to count the number of individuals that are responsible for these things, or the amount of finger pointing that goes on, you're probably going to need another hand or two because of the differences in responsibility and timing and everything else. There's all kinds of individuals that are involved in this, everything from the individuals who first bought the property all the way to when the slide actually ends up occurring. We had 5 homes slip off the edge of one of these hollows 20 years after they were built or constructed. And it was all due, we figure, UGS has been outstanding, and I want to talk more about them and what they do, but they came out and they figured that it was overwatering on the part of people with secondary water just above these homes. But 5 of them slipped. Overnight, we came back and there was one driveway that dropped 7 feet overnight, literally overnight. And that's just one of our experiences. We've had a number of others. I wanted to show you the most recent this year with an emphasis on finger pointing, on how many different directions fingers can point. I remember as a young attorney working for West Valley City that one of the first things that I had to do was to deal with a geotechnical engineer to determine where the sensitive lands in West Valley City are. Now, you wouldn't imagine anything would be sensitive in West Valley City because they're just flat. It's just flat out there. But guess what you got out there? You got a thing called liquefaction out there that when the earth starts shaking, it's just like sand standing in a wave on a shore in the sand. You just continually sink. And so I went and talked to an attorney, and I can't even remember his name. It was in downtown Salt Lake, and I said, what can we do to defend against these things? And what can we do to prepare? And this is way back in the 80s, and there wasn't very much that you could do other than to just try and get the best geotechnical information that you had. And at that time, it wasn't very much. It consisted of overhead photographs, essentially, of the ground to show where the fissures were and where the subsidence was. But let me just bring up this year's special. It was a home. If we could go to the first, I got it. I'm the driver. Thank you. Let's see.
Other direction.
Here we go. You probably can't see this, but this is a subdivision that was approved back in the late 80s, early 90s. And everything, there's a hillside that goes to your left, and it rises very, very quickly. And at the very bottom of the hillside is a cul-de-sac. And in that cul-de-sac, I'm just showing you here the number of geotechnical studies that have been done over the years. Every single one of those lines that you see in color are a different geotechnical study by a geotechnical firm showing that there is a slide potential in those particular areas. So what happens in 1992, this shows where the scarps, where they estimated the scarps were located. And in 1992, that home that you saw at the bottom there in the cul-de-sac was constructed. And then the home in 1993 was constructed just to the bottom of the cul-de-sac. And then you've got a home up in the north portion of where the red line is that was constructed in 2007. And just to indicate the difference in geotechnical ability between 1992 and 2007, the home up at the top has and was built on, because of the geotechnical studies, helical piers. And you'll see as I show you some subsequent items, the home did not subside at all. The home was safe. Now, the same study said that the backyard would not be the same, or would not experience the same success if there was any type of water inundation. And sure enough, in this year, we had the back home of that home that you see to the right, at the top of that hill, the backyard is subsiding. And you can see I'll show you where the fissures are in just a second. But I want to show you all the different things that exist. Is this, can I do a pointer here at the top? Oop. It does? Okay. I just wanted to demonstrate all of the things that, so up here in that area, you have ponding. It's at the top of a hill, and you have water that comes down off of those lots and ponds. Those are great big multi-million-dollar homes. The city made them set back, and we can talk about the solution sometime a little bit later, but the city made them set back about 150 feet because of the fact that there was a chance that there was scarping along there that showed up. So you've got the pressure of that water that was ponding above. You've got, at the very end of that street that you see there, if I can stabilize my hand here. Anyway, there's a street that you see coming from your right. And at the end of this snow season, that street had a great big pile, about 12 to 15 feet high, of snow there that had to melt and go somewhere. And then you also have drainage from the street. However, fortunately, there was a storm drain about halfway up that street. The city then cut a ditch. Oops, hang on just a second here. The city cut a ditch that you can see all the way along there to try and take the water from that great big snow pile. But the individuals that were involved in this are the home down below, which was built in 1992 and was not built with helical piers, no piering at all. And so that home slid like a sled into the cul-de-sac. It moved, as Paxton was talking about, laterally. And then the home just below that, this is another interesting feature, and another reason why there's finger pointing, is that the property owner figured that he'd read the building code that said if you built 4-foot walls, you didn't need to build foundation and footing for anything under 4 foot. And so what he did was he built a 4-foot wall, then he built a terrace, and then another 4-foot wall, and built a terrace, and another 4-foot wall. And essentially those 4-foot walls are all collapsing and moving towards his home. That was back in 1993 when nobody had any indication of where these scarps were and how big they were. And so you've got property owner responsibility. You've got the property owner above who wants to come after the city because their backyard is subsiding. You've got the property owner below that would like to come after the city because their property has slid like a sled into the cul-de-sac. And you've got the property owners above who the property owners below are saying loaded that property up above. And in order to make this even more complicated, we have a spring right to the right-hand side at the very bottom. And that spring has inundated the hillside as well and leaks down into our storm system. And so you've got all of those factors that are combined to cause us a regular nightmare is what it has done. And the question is, how could you have prevented any of that? I've got to tell you one other thing that makes this really interesting, and that is there is a full-size secondary water line that runs from the corner. I'm going to show you where it runs. If I can, oh, there we go. Runs from there all the way across there. It's about 20 inches wide, and it's pressurized, and it was installed several years ago. And so we know it's not leaking, but any subsidence of that hillside or scarping of that hillside is going to adversely affect that water line. So we've dried up the water line for this year. So we've got probably, right now I've got at least 10, maybe 11 people that are all pointing fingers saying the city did it, or he did it, or they did it. And the question is, how can you resolve, how can you deal with all of this?
The current situation today.
This is the current situation today. This is what we're briefing our council on right now. This is the backyard of the house that had the geotechnical study, and the geotechnical study showed that it needed helical piers, otherwise it would slide. So we had it set back the right distance with helical piers. We're hoping it doesn't slide. But look at the yard. And the geotechs actually indicated that this would happen if they had a heavy water year. And you can see how the main scarp comes across there and then cuts across that backyard. And that's a 2007 home. So we'll go on, and then at the end, I think I have some recommendations that we might be able to look at, but I just want to say that most of my recommendations come from UGS. And the things that I've got here in this slide are essentially in reference to publications that they have put out regarding slides and how to prevent them. Some of them go back as far as 2006, 2007. I think that the group that put out one of the publications was put together because of our slides in Layton. But there was a group of individuals that put together a publication that essentially identified things that can be done in the state of Utah, and we can talk about that maybe at the end, to reduce liability and this type of thing, to minimize it happening in the future. I noticed Jody Hoffman's over here, and I don't want to tell everybody, but she's been around that long, since 2006, 2007, because her name is on in the program. But there are some things that we can do, and maybe we could move on to somebody who can explain why it happens.
While he's changing to Steve's presentation, I just want to ask you guys a couple of questions. And if you don't feel like you can answer it, let me know. Has there been any litigation about any of this? Yeah. Or, to the extent that it's been threatened.
In our situation, we did receive numerous threats of litigation from homeowners, but we have resolved all those claims without going to litigation. There will likely be litigation against our contractor, who I believe made mistakes.
What about, Gary, in your situation? Is there litigation out there for this, or?
There's not litigation yet on this one. The first thing we did was we had an expert come in and take a look at this, but there have been litigations on our past slides, and here's one that you wouldn't expect. The 20-year slide, you'd expect the city would have no responsibility there, right? Well, here's what happened. The owner of those lots came in before they purchased the home and asked for any geotechnical studies that exist on the home that he was about ready to purchase. Purchased the home slid, and what he claimed was that when he came to the counter, we forgot to go downstairs and check when East Layton was a city. That home was built during East Layton's stint. And so he sued us, he included us as well as the engineer in the lawsuit for failing to disclose the information, because there was a geotechnical study. It was just in the basement, and East Layton had actually put it together. So that was one lawsuit that we were involved in. That was 4 years worth of lawsuit. So, and ultimately the engineering firm ended up in having to pay, and we were dismissed from this suit, but it cost us a lot of money to defend.
It's hard to have fingers pointed at you and not turn around and point fingers in other directions.
Absolutely.
All right, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Bowman. I manage the Geologic Hazards Program for the Utah Geological Survey, and for those that don't know, we're part of the Utah Department of Natural Resources. I guess if I could grab that clicker there. And so we're about 70 staff and the state geologist. We're broken up into various program areas, from administration up front to the geologic hazards program that I represent. We also do geologic mapping. Those folks go out and actually create the very colorful maps that show what the soil and rock is at the surface. We have a groundwater program that does a lot of work with groundwater quality and quantity for a variety of other agencies and uses. Energy and minerals, they do a lot of traditional oil, coal, gas studies, and then things like industrial minerals, aggregates, et cetera. And then the last two are related to getting information out to the public. And we have a main office in Salt Lake City in the DNR building on North Temple, and we also have a few geologists down in Cedar City. And so the geologic hazards program, we are basically three prongs. One is to respond to geologic hazard emergencies, similar to what Gary was talking about in Layton. Any city, county, state, or federal agency can request our services and we can come out and help them out. We don't take charge of events. We just provide unbiased information to incident commanders and others who are manning the event. Say an incident commander wants to send a search and rescue team out on a landslide, we could provide information on whether it's safe or other options in order to increase that safety. We also investigate and map these hazards and publish a lot of digital maps, and then we provide a lot of hazard-related technical and educational outreach, such as the event today. And basically the program is focused on reducing Utah's life, safety, property, and economic risks from these hazards. And the photo on the left just shows you a landslide up in Riverdale that kicked off, I believe, 2015. And this landslide, there's multiple landslides up and down the Weaver River Canyon there. This one was most likely triggered by excessive landscape irrigation. There was no landslide here prior to development, but then you can see as development comes on, a lot more springs are forming, and then much more vegetation is forming. And it's amazing how much water pours out of this mountainside. It's a very sandy geologic unit, and this is one of our potentially more deadly landslides because it takes 10 to 15 seconds for portions of the landslide to calve off, which you can see in the background there, and end up where you're standing right now in this mud flow. And so one thing just wanted to point out is talking about geologic hazards is not a negative anti-development message. What we're really trying to do is to have a smart development and resulting in sustainable communities. Because the problem is if you don't deal with these hazards up front, it can be expensive up front, but you're going to pay much, much more down the road, and many more people are going to be involved. That way you can reduce this long-term life safety, economic costs, emergency response, and a whole host of others. And every state and region has their own geologic hazards. However, we can deal with these. We generally know what they are. We know how to investigate them, and there are some great mitigation options. Of course, some of them are more expensive than others. And so for geologic hazards that can be found in Utah, unfortunately, we can pretty much find them all somewhere in Utah, including some of the volcanic hazards, like volcanic ash that actually could come from the Pacific Northwest and blow in here. But the main ones that we have, of course, are the earthquake hazards, ground shaking, liquefaction, the landslide hazards, debris flows, landslides, rockfall. And one that kind of gets forgotten are these problem soil and rock hazards. Things like expansive soil. If you don't take care of that, that can lift buildings, lift pavements, and cause millions and millions of dollars in damage. Ground subsidence and earth fissures, we're starting to see those down in southern Utah, in the Cedar City area, and that's been very detrimental in the Phoenix Valley area and the Las Vegas Valley and caused numerous damage. And I will mention radon gas. Of all of these problem soil and rock hazards, radon is really the only one that's life-threatening. And of all of the fatalities that we've been able to calculate since statehood, radon gas is about 96 to 97% of those. And so one thing we do is to create geologic hazard maps. And it's difficult to predict when these geologic hazards are going to occur, but we can generally predict where they're going to occur. And these hazard maps are an effective tool to really understand if you need to do some very detailed site-specific investigations, say for a residential development or some type of infrastructure or commercial. And we produce these geologic hazard maps. The UGS is a non-regulatory public service agency, and so we don't have a conflict of interest. And so the purpose of these maps is to help communities avoid these costly and sometimes deadly geologic hazard issues. And you can't do mitigation if you don't first recognize where they are. And these maps are not a substitute for doing site-specific investigations, but they can really help communities, builders, and others have a good idea up front of what kind of hazards are expected in a particular area. And so they can really help to dial in these site-specific investigations so that they're more accurate, and the proposal price that you get hopefully is going to be better because they know more up front of what's going on. And the map on the right is just a map of landslide hazard map, and they're usually in stoplight colors, so red high hazard, yellow moderate, and green low hazard. Unfortunately, to do these detailed geologic hazard maps in multiple hazards, it takes quite a bit of time, and so we don't have a huge amount of state covered in the modern mapping, but we do have, for the fault locations, the entire Wasatch Fault Zone from south of Fayette to up near Malad City, Idaho mapped, and then for a variety of other faults, we have those mapped, along with the special study zones that go around those. And then for the comprehensive mapping, things like landslides, rockfall, surface fault rupture, and a whole host of other maps, we have the Western Salt Lake Valley covered. Cedar City and Cedar Valley is very close to being released. Moab, the St. George, SR9 corridor out to Zion, and the more heavily used areas of Zion National Park is complete. Same thing with Glen Canyon. And then we have the Davis-Weber County radon mapped. And then for landslides, we've had a many-year project with the U.S. Forest Service on the Wasatch Plateau where we've mapped landslides in high detail. And this just shows you one of those hazard maps for rockfall in Rockville, Utah, just to the west of Zion National Park. And the red area is one of those high hazard rockfall zones, and those colored lines with the stars just show you rockfall events that have occurred over the years. And unfortunately, we did have 2 fatalities in a cabin here over there on the west end of Rockville. And what was left of the cabin, there wasn't a 2x4 piece of wood in there longer than about 2 foot left. There was a small SUV, and one of the rocks came down and crushed it down. It was maybe a foot thick, if that. It was pretty devastating. And you can see in the middle photo, there's a rock that actually rolled through that little service porch there, rolled in a door at the other end, went through the service porch, and rolled back out. Fortunately, on that one, no one was hurt. The one that says 2013, that was the one with the 2 fatalities. Oops, there we go. This is the Spring Creek Road landslide that you saw earlier down below looking up at it. There was 4 homes that were eventually demolished. And this one here just kept creeping back. It's kind of an unusual one because Gary mentioned, it's lake bed sediments of sand and also from the Weber River. It's been quite hazardous, and so the city fenced it off for safety. This is that landslide looking down below. One of the other tasks that we do is we do a lot of landslide reconnaissance and monitoring, and of course at the winter of 2023 we were very busy. There was quite a few landslides up and down I-80 in Summit County, Little Dell Reservoir. You can see a lot of these kind of superficial slides. On the lower right is one called the Watchman landslide, and just behind those green trees is where the Virgin River is. And so if that landslide were to slide into the river, it would likely dam it and then completely flood Springdale. And so one hazard can also create another hazard and move quite far distances. Debris flow hazards are always a big thing in Utah, particularly when we have these fire-related debris flows. When we have these large fires, all the vegetation is burned off. Then we have those summer monsoon rains come in, dump a lot of water over a short period of time. That starts mobilizing sediment that's down in these channels and comes flying down. And these debris flows can travel up to 65 plus miles an hour, so you can't outrun them. The photo on the right there just shows a big landslide that went into Santaquin back in 2002, and it flooded multiple basements and created havoc all over town. Back in 2012, after the Sealy fire up on the Manti La Salle National Forest, going through State Route 31, every time it rained, down come all of the sediment. And there was a big push to open campgrounds in this area because it was starting to be hunting season. But the Forest Service had used our debris flow maps that we had created right after the fire to have justification to close those campgrounds, and had they had those open, one campground was completely engulfed by a debris flow, and had people been there, it would have been multiple deaths. And for some strange reason, a lot of debris flows happen at night. The other big hazard that Utah faces is a damaging earthquake. And most people are probably familiar with the Wasatch Fault Zone. It generally runs along the base of the Wasatch Mountains, all the way from down south of Utah Lake up into Idaho. And these probabilities were originally calculated in 2016, and so they're much greater than they are now. There's basically a 1 in 2 chance of a magnitude 7 or greater earthquake in the northern Utah area. And we're currently awaiting a funding decision from the U.S. Geological Survey to convene a working group to update these probabilities. But if we were to have a magnitude 6.5 or greater, which we can get up to about a 7.6 earthquake, there would be havoc around. And the Federal Emergency Management Agency has estimated there's over $80 billion short-term losses from an event like that. Oops. And so most of our faults in Utah are called normal faults, and that's where one side of the fault goes up. So if in the big picture there in the center, you could say that'd be the Wasatch Mountains. Wasatch Mountains goes up, and the valley on the other side goes down, creates this scarp, and that's another hazard because you don't want to build a building on a scarp, because if you have more than 3 or 4 inches of differential movement, you could end up having building collapse. And so over in the lower left-hand corner, a consultant has dug a fault trench to accurately locate a fault prior to construction. And all the information that we produce is available pretty much all online. This is just our homepage at geology.utah.gov. If you scroll down about halfway, you'll get to this horizontal bar that says Interactive Maps, and the center two there, the Geologic Map portal and the Hazards portal, are mainly the 2 easy ways to get to all of our mapping. And this is what it looks like when you go right to it. Over there in that kind of red highlighted box, you can turn on various hazard maps. You just click the little triangle to open and close that. Here we've clicked the earthquake hazards triangle, gives you how old those faults are. And this is just a blow up of an area south of the International Airport, showing those hazardous faults in orange, and then those yellow areas are the special study areas that we recommend fault trenching in a fault study be done before construction. And as you can see, there are several buildings built across the fault. Many years ago, probably 20 years ago, the survey had put a variety of investigation report guidelines together, and they had gotten quite outdated. And so we have now updated all of those in this one volume called the Guidelines for Investigating Geologic Hazards. And back in 2020, we created a second edition of that. And so there are guidelines in there for how generally to conduct these investigations, and then for specific hazards like surface fault rupture, landslides, debris flow, land subsidence, rockfall hazards. We added a new one for radon gas hazard, and then highlighted there in yellow, we also created a model geologic hazards ordinance. And this is something that'd be very easy for cities and counties to adopt. In Utah, there's no statewide geologic hazards statute or rule. It's all done at the local ordinance level. And that model ordinance is in an appendix, and it's meant to be a balance, a happy balance. So it's not over prescriptive, over costly, but it's not, we're trying not to be under either. And as mentioned earlier, there's a variety of air photos. In fact, there's over 400,000 of them that are available online, and we're adding more every week. And those are available at the website that you see there, where you can take a look at to see were there old landslides on a property before development, et cetera. And everything that is in there is public domain, so you can grab it and use it. And this is just some of the examples of what's in there, from black and white imagery, color imagery, and then on the right, the color infrared. The Forest Service mainly did that for vegetation purposes. Vegetation is in various colors of red. And that's all I have for, other than to say that we can prepare for and deal with these hazards.
Thank you very much, Steve. I have a couple questions for you. First of all, is there anywhere in this country that I could move to that isn't about to fall into an ocean or get blown up by an earthquake or a volcano?
Well, there's a hazard pretty much everywhere, but most of them you can deal with one way or the other.
Well, in a more serious way, and this is going to seem glib again, but the Highway Patrol has a 0 fatalities goal. Is there any possibility, anything we can do to create a 0 loss of property, 0 drapers happen, to keep that from happening? I mean, are we talking about if I'm a landowner and part of my land is in one of these geological survey areas, is there any way we can act so that we can be sure that this does not happen again ever?
Well, in order to get to a 0 amount, you're never going to get all the way to 0, but it really depends on how much time do you want to take and how much do you want to spend. If you go back into the 50s, most people thought you probably would never have a man on the moon, and then in the 60s that happened, but it took a lot of time and a lot of money. It just depends on how much do you want to mitigate these things. A lot of times for landslides, they're not cost effective to mitigate for residential construction. Something like a freeway or an interstate, yes, because the interstate probably has to go where it's designed to go, and so that landslide may be mitigated. But for other developments that don't have that importance or financial involvement, it's probably not cost effective to mitigate that. At that point, then maybe zoning comes into place where maybe that turns into a park or something like that, where you only have transient use and you move development to areas that are a little safer. So it may be a trade-off.
And my last question, which is going to segue into hearing back from these folks before I ask for questions from the audience, is, so I'm a home builder. I want to build on a hillside. People want to buy my house on a hillside. What is your recommendation when that happens?
Well, you'd want to...
Your 30-second, quick, glib, what
Okay.
you going to do?
Well, you definitely want to do a good geotechnical investigation, but it also comes down to design standards. And that's an area that most Utah communities don't have. If you go to the Pacific Coast or Nevada, there are very specific construction and design requirements for building on slopes. And generally, you'd be required to key in any kind of fill. So if you're placing a fill, you have to make sure that you completely strip off all the vegetation, because you don't want any of that, because if it starts rotting, that will cause you settlement. But you also want to cut in equipment-wide benches. And so you basically have this sawtooth or stair-step look to it. And then when you bring it back up, you want to put your lifts in no more than 12 inches. Because if you end up end-upping, you can't compact soils over about 12 inches. You might compact the upper 4 to 6 inches, but you can't compact the other part of the 12 inches. And you also have to make sure that there's very good drainage. You don't want water coming over a slope, and if you build retaining walls, you want to make sure that there's plenty of drainage behind the retaining wall, because you can build up pore pressure, water pressure behind that wall, and push that wall right out of there. And a lot of that is contained in ordinance in a variety of communities to the west of us and parts of Colorado, but unfortunately we haven't done that here.
Do you know of any place in Utah that has taken that on, or?
I'm not aware of it.
So folks, I told these guys that they would have a few minutes at the beginning that they could each take where they would not be interrupted. We're going to let them talk for a little while, but this is the part where you should feel free to interrupt. You should feel free to ask questions, get clarifications. Do not leave here without making sure your question is asked at some point. Paxton, I'm going to throw it back to you. Let's talk about what's next, what your recommendations are.
Okay, great, thank you. I have 5 points I want to cover, and you actually hit on a couple of them, but I'll probably elaborate a little. No, it's probably good to hear these things a few times. So five items that I guess I've learned from the investigation and the process that I'd recommend you always do. If you're going to build on a hillside or a slope, if you're going to build on any sort of fill material, these are the 5 points I'd ask you to focus on. First, you have to make sure you're using suitable fill material. And there's all sorts of ways to make sure you're using suitable fill material, but the best way is to have a wide sampling of proctors and making sure you know what the optimal moisture content is to achieve the right compaction. Compaction is crucial when you're building on fill material. In this case, in Draper, we had a very extensive, in fact, we had several extensive geohazard reports, and they recommended compacting in 10-inch lifts. So that means that whole hillside that was built, you would compact to at least 95% compaction and every 10-inch lift. That's probably something you would recommend, correct? You've got to do that with the right fill material though, because if you're using fill material that doesn't drain, that won't reach the kind of solid foundation you want, you can compact all day long and it's going to have problems if you're using material, for instance, that has a high plasticity level. Anybody heard of that concept, plasticity? In Utah, this is a common problem. Plasticity level, a higher level, means you have high clay content. Clay does not drain. Clay acts like a dam. That's a problem if you're using clay. Changing on that, do you agree?
What about if you're not on a slope? I mean, houses are built on fill material
Right.
regularly.
Right. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but again, you've got to make sure you're using the right fill material, that a geotech engineer says, we're comfortable that if you use this material, it'll be a solid foundation. When you're doing large master plan communities that require a lot of mass grading, the temptation is to use the soils from your own site as fill material. Why? Because it's much less expensive. When you have to export fill material and then bring in imported structural engineered material, A1A or whatever it might be, you've got a lot of heavy transportation costs. Taking the material out, paying for the new material, transporting the new material back in. That is, however, the best practice. I don't think there's an engineer or a geologist in town that would tell you the best practice is just to reuse the material from your own site, even though it is very, very commonly done. So take that into account when you're trying to figure out what fill material to use. That was point number one. Point number two, you must design and install the correct drainage system, both subsurface and surface. So in this project, our extensive engineering geotech report called for several canyon drains. Canyon drains are drains that are installed right at the bottom where your fill material connects to the native bedrock or soil. And you need to have canyon drains that will drain. There's a lot of drainage occurring subsurface that you don't see every day. The water is moving subsurface, and you need to have the right drainage system to capture that water and channel it away to the proper locations. Number three, you've got to do the correct compaction techniques. As was mentioned, benching and stepping. You've got to grub away all the organic material, use clean fill material, but you have to tie it in or key it in, as you said, the fill material to native soil, solid, clean native soil. And you do it through bedrocking, which is like a stair step, and you tie it in at each one of those steps. Number four, this is something that I haven't seen recommended before, but in hindsight, I wish we would do it. There's something called a standard soil penetration test or a blow count test. But just by raise of hands. Anybody know what that is? I'm sure you do.
Hope you do, Steve.
Okay, standard soil penetration or blow test, blow count test. What this is, it's basically a long, narrow, still rod with a bit of a point edge at the bottom of it, and you strike it at the top with a 140-pound weight. That's the standard weight that is used to strike it at the top, or the blow. Each strike is considered a blow, and you measure how many blows or strikes it takes to drive that steel rod anywhere from 6 to 12 inches into the soil. You've got different measurement devices. What that does is it tells you the kind of compaction you've reached and how solid that soil is. To give you some context for what I'm talking about, in our project that you saw there, our tests, we did some testing right before the landslide. And our blow count tests were showing all the way down to 30 feet below surface that it only took 3, 4, or 5 blows for that soil nail to travel 6 inches. An acceptable number of blow counts would have been 15 or higher. Do you disagree with that? 10 maybe?
It depends on.
Yeah. I've heard some say 10, some say 15. But think about that. 30 feet of soil in certain of these boring locations, we're only requiring 1, 2, or 3 strikes for that metal rod to travel 6 inches. That is highly indicative of soil that is loose, that is not stable, and that was not compacted. You say, well, how does that happen? Well, when we developed the site, our contractor gave us compaction tests showing that each 10-inch lift had reached a 95% compaction or higher. I'm here to tell you there is no way that's possible if you show blow counts of 1, 2, or 3. You cannot reconcile that. There is a mistake there somewhere, and that's why we're going to end up in litigation. But so what I'm recommending, and the reason I'm going to this explanation is, if you're going to build on fill material, I strongly recommend you do blow counts on the soil to verify the compaction yourself before you put a structure on it. Do a blow count test. See if it takes 15 or more strikes to go 6 inches. If it does, you can feel pretty good about your compaction and the soil that's used. If not, you want to correct the problem before you put a house on it. And I haven't seen a single geological hazard report that recommends that practice. I wish we would, and we're going to follow that in our company from now on. The fifth and final pointer I'll tell you, for those lawyers in the room, make sure you have solid contractors, or solid contracts with your contractors. Do not agree to contracts that have limitations of liability. $10 million bill we're facing on what we're doing there. Make sure you have solid contracts that require you, as the owner builder, to be named as an additional insured on your subcontractor's liability policies. If possible, get a policy that does not have an earth movement exclusion. I'm dealing with that right now, and it's a real headache. But make sure you've got solid contracts so that you're not stuck holding the bag. Again, from Edge Homes' perspective, we hired very qualified contractors. We gave them all of the geotech reports. Our contracts required them to comply with all the geotech recommendations, and this still happened. And at this point so far, we're the ones left holding the bag.
Thanks, Paxton. Very good stuff. Gary? Yeah.
Multiple factors that you think caused this, or you think it was just the poor compaction? Because we all know the compaction's key, but you still have a slip plane.
Yeah.
If you compact properly, that slip plane is still going to give way to drainage. If that wasn't put in properly.
I think there are multiple factors. I really do. I mean, I would love to know, first of all, we haven't seen evidence that the canyon drains were installed. We've conducted open heart surgery on that hillside. We don't see the canyon drains, so that's going to be a problem. But I would love to know, even if all the canyon drains were put in, the right fill material was used, the right compaction was reached, given the amount of moisture that was up, and this is up at Suncrest, this is at a high elevation, given the amount of snowpack that we had last winter that melted, would this have happened anyway?
In time. So also, we all know that there's more water in soil
Yeah. You get into a causation analysis on the event that we've seen that happened at Draper there. I think you could have 10 experts give you 5 different causation analyses.
Well, I look at it, if we only have one factor possibly, it could be the latent effect. Happens 20 years later. You probably had multiple factors that probably caused it.
Right.
It wasn't engineered, it was not compacted properly. Different areas of that.
Great point. Oh, I also wanted to give you one other practice pointer, and that is hire your own person to be on site 24/7 to make sure they're following these recommendations. It's not enough, in my opinion, to just give your contractor the list of geotech requirements and say, make sure you satisfy them. That's not going to work anymore. We need to have someone from our own company on site every day, all day long, when work's being done, to make sure they're actually compacting each layer of lift, not just forgetting a couple in between.
And your own geotechnical company testing.
Exactly. If you've got a 40-foot fill like we had at the bottom of this ravine that the homes were on, all it takes is missing 1 or 2 layers, 1 or 2 lifts of compaction, and suddenly you've got like an oil grease slid in the middle, and the whole slide's it's like an avalanche. You've got a loose slab somewhere in there.
What about contractors, Paxton? What's the market like for contractors? Do we have the ability to negotiate with them to get them to take out these kinds of clauses that you're talking about right now?
It's tough. To get the contractors to come up to that site to do our hillside remediation, we had to give all sorts of concessions and protections. Nobody wanted to step in there and touch that.
The other thing you have to think about is not always taking low bid.
Absolutely.
Don't take low bid.
Great point. Okay, I'll repeat the question, Craig. So the question is, what could the city have done differently to protect the project, the contractor, the homeowners? I don't know, because one thing I've learned over 25 years of law practice is you can't count on city inspections. You just can't. They're very infrequent, and there's no recourse anyway. There's no warranty that comes with a city inspection that says, yeah, we're comfortable that you've met the plans. I do think the city required everything they could up front. I mean, we had to go through extensive geotech studies, prove it up, have it reassessed by an outside engineer, multiple layers of approval before everybody said, yeah, we're comfortable with this design, not just for the retaining walls, but for how you're going to build that hillside. I don't know that the city could have done anything different. And to say that the city would have to step in and fix this, no city's going to do that. No city's going to do that. They don't have the funds, and candidly, I don't think it's their responsibility.
That's a good segue to Gary. Gary, same question.
So how many cities have the ability to send an inspector out to watch all of those lifts? Probably nobody, right? And that's part of the problem and that's part of the reason that cities are not very often found responsible unless there's some type of negligence or alleged negligence, like not disclosing. I wanted to tell you where everything that Steve just talked about started. And can we go back to my presentation just for a sec? It really started with Layton. I went and looked at the original study that they'd done, or the original group that got together in 2006, 2007. This is the original study that was done and recommendations on how to reduce losses from geological hazards. I realize that it's been updated since then, and the new version, the 2020 version, I think, is very, very helpful. The document, and I'll show you, I've got a reference to that, and it is in the materials. But they made about 3 things, 3 recommendations that I want to focus on and maybe talk about a 4th. The first thing was make sure you educate local governments on takings liability. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't, and no good turn goes unpunished. If you try to prevent something from happening, or if you say this is safe to build right here, and everything falls, then even though you may not end up in paying for it, you're going to be sued over it. There's no question. If you've indicated this is a safe spot to build, and because of the geotechnical studies and you opine on that, then you're probably going to be included in the action.
Are you telling people not to opine on that?
No, I'm not doing that. I'll show you in just a second what I do. And then the other thing is no good turn goes unpunished, because you're always going to get development pushing, especially now that the really, really hard ground to develop is the only ground being developed these days, especially when development was in its high day just a few months ago. But exactions, there's an exaction provision. You got to make sure that the things you're asking for, there's a link between those and the impact that is being caused, and that you don't over-exact when it comes even to this. Really, the cities are and do have a lot of protection through our immunity provisions for inspections, for those types of things. But the things that you can do are this. When I went and talked to that attorney years ago and asked him, what can you actually do as a city? His indication was the best thing you can do is notify. And so in Layton City, after the experiences we had in 2006, 2007, we put a notice on every single plat. And every single plat refers specifically to the geotechnical study that was done, indicating that the city has that. And if you want to look at it, and if you want to have it reviewed by your own geotech, you can go ahead and do that. We also designate on the plat, oftentimes scarp lines. We just recently had an individual build a wall, that 4-foot wall situation, over a scarp line, and failed to put any drainage at the bottom. We had to have them tear the whole thing out because those two lots, the lots, and this is, once again, regarding the takings issue, those two lots have an R on them as restricted, giving the property owner notification that there's something special about their property, and it probably has to do with geotechnical issues. And so we put this on every single plat where there is a geotechnical report that exists. In addition to that, on the building permit, we put a provision at the bottom that said, there's a geotechnical report on this property. You might want to take a look at it. And then we go one step further and we say, and you have looked at the geotechnical report or had somebody look at it. And so essentially what we're doing is putting it back on the individual to look at it or have professionals look at that report. Now, does that totally exempt you from any liability in the future? No, it doesn't. But the notice is a significant piece to letting property owners know that there's some indication on the property that would indicate that you ought to take a second look at it. I just wanted to give you this information too. This is the information that Steve was talking about. It's the Model Geotechnical Ordinance. I give you a reference, and it will be in the materials, I think, that will be online. And then he referred to also the guideline for investigating geotechnical hazards. Because the second advice that group gave in 2006, 2007 was that you do put together in your general plan provisions that deal specifically with hazards, and that you do put into place an ordinance such as a sensitive lands ordinance or another ordinance that specifically deals with those hazards. And these tell you how to do it. You don't have to adopt them verbatim, but they really give some good guidance as to how to put something like that together. Here's a statement that group made, and I just want to emphasize it. Legislation is generally not needed, and expanded direct state involvement in local government land use regulations is not suggested. Really, when it comes down to it, is the responsibility of the developer and the city. And when the legislature steps in to take action, it sometimes is disastrous because they paint things with a single brush. And I just want to give you an example. Years ago, in 2017, a long time ago, they took out a provision. Layton had land drains all over the areas where we considered subject to liquefaction, and also in a lot of the subdivisions. To put a land drain in, you got to put a complete system in. Well, the legislature decided that we didn't need land drains unless a geotech opined that we did. And so the subdivider at that time, who had a great big subdivision out there, said, guess what? The legislature exempted us from having to put land drains in. The next year we came back because we had troubles with those areas that we had exempted from land drains. And we had, what do you think? We had flooding. And so we put this provision in that said that, actually we ended up with this provision at the end, that the geotechnical engineer must opine that you do not need a land drain because this area won't flood, essentially. because we were getting so many situations where they had exempted it, except if the geotech happens to mention in his report, because of this change at the state legislative level, that we had nobody putting land drains in anymore. And if you don't connect one part of a land drain up with another one, if you have a problem over here, you're not going to be able to have anywhere to drain it. So it didn't make any sense not to put those drains in. We've had developers tell us after the fact that putting that land drain in was probably the least expensive thing that they could have done when it came to having to face flooding problems years later. The land drain was just a small expense in comparison. And I realize every expense is important when it comes to homes. But I guess what that group in 2006, 2007 said is accurate, and that is really local government and the developers are the ones that really ought to be addressing these issues, not the legislature. Just one other, just really quick thing. A couple of years ago, we had a case where it's called the Hayes case. It was a Supreme Court case, and the League of Cities and Towns joined as amicus in that case. And it was about the economic loss rule, which many of you may not be aware of, or some of you may. The economic loss rule is essentially a focus on a restatement, is what lawyers actually go to when they forget everything they learned in law school and want to learn exactly what something means. The economic loss rule is a rule that says that in the case of a builder's deficiency or a deficiency in construction, that essentially all you have to turn to is the contract. That is primarily what you turn to. So if you want to end up in going after somebody in tort because you feel there was negligence in building on a scarp or something of that nature, the economic loss rule will actually prevent you from doing that unless the end owner of the home has direct privity or direct connection with the person who did the geotechnical study. And that's important. It's significant because in your purchase contract, it may not be a bad idea to put something in there that allows you to go directly after a geotech. There's probably geotechs out here that are going to hate me for saying that. But we have actually codified that in the state of Utah, that rule. And so it's a good practice to make sure that if you're buying a home, that you have that provision in place.
Thanks, Gary. You have anything to add, Steve, to that?
I guess the other thing to mention too is, most of the professions, including geologists and engineers, are licensed by DOPL, and so if there are problems,
It's their fault, Doppel's fault.
you can submit a complaint and they will investigate every complaint. I served on the Professional Geologist Licensure Board for 8 years, and we had a few, not many. If you go to other states, they are very busy, but
Awesome.
that's another avenue as well.
We have about a minute for any questions. Anybody have anything right here? Go ahead. Hold on.
Thank you. So I really like the notice provision, and we've had to do something similar in North Ogden, but all of the notices that you mentioned are going to really, like in the Edge Homes case, it's going to be the developer builder or any large developer builder. So is there one more notice, I guess, and maybe this is overkill, but the end home buyer, the actual person who's going to live in that home, they've likely never seen the building permit. Their title company may or may not have shown them the plat, likely not. They signed something that said, we went over the plat with you, but no one ever looks at the plat. At least that's my 15 years of experience in planning and talking to several buyers of homes. I look at plats, but so how do you have something that when somebody signs up for utilities, they walk in and you say, hey, did you know you're in a restricted lot and you're not going to be able to build in this drainage easement in your backyard? Which is what we've had to do because we're losing drainage easements. The first thing people are doing is they're going in on drainage swales and filling them because they want their backyards flat. So we're being the big bad city that's bumming out brand new home buyer who just purchased a home and saying, oh, by the way, this thing you thought you were going to be able to do with your land because your builder, your developer, all your downstream people never told you is you have to protect this particular geologic hazard. So how do you let the actual end user know, or should it be a responsibility of the city to let the end homeowner know?
My opinion is it's really not the responsibility of the city to do that. The homeowner really ought to be doing his due diligence, but as you said, nobody looks at their plat, and maybe nobody looks at the building permit. If there is something that we know about, we'll inform the individual by a notice on the deed, actually on the deed, if we actually know about something that is dangerous in a condition that exists. But we don't do that as a practice. Liability is an interesting thing because you can have a dam in your jurisdiction and a trail around the dam, and somebody drowns in that dam and you don't ever get sued for it. However, if you put a fence up around that dam and a hole develops in the fence, all of a sudden you've got liability for the hole in the fence that allowed this person to get in. And so in my opinion, it's a balance, if you can see the analogy to geotechnical issues. I mean, if I were to say, this is a safe place to build, a warning rather than a notice that there's a geotechnical study that exists on this, I think I'm going to get into trouble. And the more you kind of focus on one lot, and this is what you ought to be doing on this lot, I think you can get into trouble doing that.
One more question?
I'm just curious.
I'll come back to you. We got two more questions then.
There's so in the last couple of years, we've had LID requirements come on as a requirement in the state, right? So you talk about land drains, and LIDs are doing the exact opposite, where we're now, in unless you can justify otherwise, you need to be doing LID on site and letting on-site infiltration happen. But a lot of the issues that you've brought up that have seemed to be at least a factor in some of these slides is secondary water on site, and so you've got a similar dynamic with LID infiltration. I'm just wondering if there's any data or any insights that you have about any impacts of LID requirements now being added to subdivisions affecting groundwater or soil stability.
I don't. I mean, control of water is really critical for a lot of these hazards, particularly landslides. And so you're not going to want to have infiltration basins or any, kind of infiltration galleries or anything like that above these particular areas. And in fact, in some of these areas, you may even want to consider using sealed storm drains, because when storm drains are installed, it's usually concrete bell and socket pipe that's not sealed. But if you're not careful, you just now made basically a leach line out of your storm drain. And so that's something to consider, as the design goes on. In some areas, you may want to end up doing sealed pipes, but then once you get past that zone, you may not need that. And then you could put your infiltration basins in non-hazardous areas.
That's great.
Charlie, did you have something?
Yeah.
Hold on, Charlie.
Now I could whisper. So thinking through how to keep the private market responsible and accountable. I'm just curious, $10 million remediation for the issue that Edge Homes has dealt with. Probably can sell each of those lots with a home on it for $1 million apiece. Why is Edge Homes taking the responsibility to remediate this particular issue? That's question number one. And question number two, why not point the fingers everywhere else like everyone else was doing?
So the question, why is Edge Homes taking the lead to fix this problem? Well, basically because nobody else will. Nobody else will, and we don't have the luxury of waiting. If you saw where that landslide occurred, where those two homes fell, they are right up against a public street with all the utilities underneath that street. And our biggest concern was that if we didn't step in immediately and stabilize that land, putting up the soil nails and the shotcrete wall, the street could have collapsed. Further erosion and damage, additional sliding, additional homes could have fallen. This was all about minimizing damages. You do have a duty to mitigate your losses, right? Although a $10 million bill doesn't sound like mitigating losses, but we have to fix it. We're partners with the city. We've got a lot going on with Draper City. Nobody else has the resources or the manpower to step up and fix it, so we're fixing it. Hopefully we can recover some of these costs. We'll see. I don't know. I will say this, there's a lot of builders and developers who couldn't do this, right? The smaller shops, there's no way they could step up, direct all this manpower to fixing a problem and having money bleed out like this and stay in business.
That's what led to my question. The name of the game, holding the bag at the end of the development when things go wrong.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of smaller shops that would have just said, sue us. We had a special purpose LLC for that project, has
Right.
no more assets. We have no way to solve this problem. So you homeowners, deal with your homeowners insurance. City, you solve the problem. It's your public infrastructure. That just doesn't work.
Right.
There's no way to solve this problem other than how we've done it, in my opinion. It could have led to much worse problems.
I agree. You mentioned something in your presentation that the hillside was developed to the specifications of the city standards, and in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if we're relying on just the city standards to guide us, maybe that's not enough. We hear developers say, well, you're regulating us out of business, but then if we don't regulate them out of business, things aren't built the right way, right?
Well, there's the city standards by code, which yes, we complied with, but then there were a full additional layer of geological recommendations from the Geological Hazard Report, which we thought our contractors were also complying with.
Reason why I bring it up, I was just thinking about LLCs and responsibility and how to keep the private market responsible for being the private market. And I think the LLC is kind of the crutch there, right?
Yeah.
On how to get out of it. And so I don't know if there's a way that we can start shoring that up a little bit so that developers can remain responsible. They don't drive away in their Lexus to the big house on the hill that is geologically sound while their development sinks in the ground.
Good point.
I don't want to imply that there's nothing the city can do. Out of all the houses that have slipped in Layton City, I think I can't remember one, because of the fact that they happened 20 years later. The city became actively involved in working with the banks, in working with, we moved one house from one location to another lot. We sold one house and they peered it up, and it did work for a little while, and then it slipped again. But the bottom line is there were no developers anymore. There are no developers after 20 years on a parcel of property, and the city's faced with that issue. We're still there. And so kudos to Scott Carter, who was our economic development director then, and the others that worked with banks. We now have a trailhead on Sunset Drive where those homes fell off. And it was dedicated by or donated by the bank. And so we have had to work with individuals who have been in the unfortunate situation of being years later. And not just, it's great if you have a developer like Edge that will take responsibility for it, but years later, you may not have an Edge. Edge may not be around, so.
Okay, it's time to wrap up. We'd just like to thank this panel quite clearly. We chose the right people for this. What's going to happen this afternoon, we've just heard from three great people who have a lot of insight about what happens and what the recommendations are immediately. We're going to hear later about not just landslides, but other kinds of disasters and what the long-term effects are, and the people who have experienced them years ago and what they can recommend for us as well. But in the meantime, thank you, gentlemen, so much. I think that was a great session. I'm going to turn it over to Craig.
I absolutely agree. That was a terrific, engaging, very thoughtful session. Just a couple of details. If you're an attorney or a planner or a member of planning commission, you're welcome to take a certificate home back to the office to put in your file to indicate you've been here. But you must sign the sheet that says you are an attorney and you want attorney credit. So there's 3 hours available for this afternoon, and there's 7 hours available for tomorrow. We'll keep track of these separately, but if for any reason you forget, you can put 10 hours tomorrow and I'll believe you. But we must have your name because we don't know who the attorneys are unless we see the name on the list. For real estate professionals, we're certainly giving credit. You'll sign up in a different place, and this is not your certificate. You need to get a separate one. And because of the real estate division rules, we have to hand it to you after the meeting. So you must pick up your certificate at the end of the meeting so that we can verify to the real estate division that you stayed for the entire engaging, exciting 3 hours. Plus, from the realtors, we also need you to fill out an evaluation form. We care what the realtors think. We don't care what the rest of you think. So anyway, the realtors fill out this form and give it to the receptionist at the registration desk when you pick up your certificate at the end of the day. So that's all I've got. Thank you. Let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll start again at 3:25.